All right, well, let's turn back to Ecclesiastes. We'll be chapter number 10, and we'll try to get through verses 1 through 20. And our next study might be our last one. There might be one after that. I'm not for sure. If I can kind of get it all together into the next one, I'll try to. I'm looking forward to, not that I'm growing tired of this study. It's just that I get excited about what comes next too, so I'm ready to get into fresh material too. But Ecclesiastes 10, and we'll try to read verses 1 through 20, and we're going to walk through those together. But as we look at this chapter, Solomon is getting closer. Remember the Hebrew Koheleth, he is the preacher, he is the one that has written this. And before he comes to the conclusion of this book, he wants to remind his congregation, he wants to remind the ones that he would be addressing this to, his audience, the importance of wisdom. And we've spoken of this a lot as we have journeyed through this book together. And also, not only the importance of wisdom, but the danger of folly. In verse number 1, Solomon laid down the basic principle that folly creates problems for those who commit it. Let's look at this verse together. It says, "Dead flies cause the ointment of the apothecary to send forth a stinking savor. So doth a little folly him that is in reputation for wisdom and honor." Now, that word folly, what is the definition of that when you look at that word literally? It is the state of or quality of being foolish, lack of understanding, or sense. Now, Solomon has already compared a good name to a fragrant perfume all the way back in chapter number 7 and verse number 1. And so he brings out this image again. And what he's saying here, he's saying that what dead flies are to perfume, folly is the reputation of the wise person. So what is he basically saying, just literally Jason's terms here tonight, is that wise people will stay away from folly. That's what he's getting at here. This is his whole point. Now, I'm going to share with you a story. This may not be new to you, but I thought it would be very relevant for what we're discussing here tonight. It's an old story. You sure probably have heard it. It's called Four People on an Airplane. You may have heard this. If not, it's new to you. That's great. There was a pilot, the smartest man in the world, the richest man in the world, and an immature teenager, all on an airplane. Well, the pilot comes out and says, "Listen, we've got problems. This plane's going down, but we've only got 3 parachutes. So we're going to have to figure something out here." Well, the rich man takes one immediately and says, "I've got to have one, because if I don't, my lawyers will sue all of you and you won't want to live at all after this." So he takes one, grabs, and jumps off the plane. Well, then the smartest man in the world takes one, and he jumps off the plane. Well, then the pilot comes to the teen and said, "Listen, young lad, we've got a problem here. There's one parachute left. And I guess all we can do is just fight over it." And the teenager looked up at him and said, "Sir, you don't have to worry about that, because the smartest man in the world jumped off with my backpack." But it's interesting that often people think that they are truly wise and at the same time can be foolish. Why is one person foolish and another wise? Solomon says this all depends on the indications of the heart. In verse number 2, a wise man's heart is at his right hand, and a fool's heart at his left. Now, Solomon was not referring to the physical organ in the body here. This is not what he's getting at, because everybody's heart is in the same place unless you have some physical birth defect, and I actually know my best friend growing up, he had a son, and his son, it's really strange, I can't remember the term, but he was born with all of his major organs were opposite of each other. So he has to have some special identification that if something ever happens to him, they know that he has this birth defect. But Solomon was not referring to the physical organ in the body because the physical organ has nothing to do with wisdom or folly. Solomon was referring to the center of one's life. This is what he's getting at. The master control within us that governs the issues of life. Look what it says in Proverbs 4, verse number 23. Keep thy heart with all diligence, for out of it are the issues of life. Now, in the ancient world, we got to go back here to get some understanding about what we're trying to look at and describe here. The right hand was considered the place of power and honor, while the left hand symbolized and represented weakness and rejection. That was just symbolism that was during that in the ancient world. Many believe that if you were born left-handed, you were just going to have a very unlucky life. That was what the ancient world considered. Is anybody in here tonight? Are you left-handed? I know a couple of left-handed. You left-handed, really? Really? Okay. Well, you're not unlucky. That's just what the ancient world considered it. But today, there's not many left-handed individuals. I know of some. Now I know you are. I didn't know that. But the English word sinister, and this is interesting. The English word sinister comes from a Latin word that means on the left hand. And since the fool doesn't have wisdom in his heart, he gravitates toward that which is wrong, the left, which is that which is wrong, and it gets him into trouble. And this is what is being spoken of here. Then he goes on into verse number 3, and he says, Yea, also, when he that is a fool walketh by the way, his wisdom faileth him, and he saith to everyone that he is a fool. So what does this say? People try to correct him. People try to speak some truth into him. People try to get him to do the right thing, but he refuses to listen. He refuses. This all goes back to the destructiveness. That's what the sermon topic is tonight, the title. The destructiveness of folly is that he refuses to listen, and this tells everyone that he's a fool. He doesn't have to go out and say, oh, I'm a fool. I'm a fool. He doesn't have to be the court jester dressed up looking like a fool. But what he is doing is that he's telling people he is by the way he presents himself, how he acts. And with these principles that he states here in these first 3 verses, Solomon gives us 4 different fools in chapter number 10. And we're going to look at those individually here. Number 1, he starts off with the foolish ruler. Now, if there is one person that needs wisdom, it is the ruler of a nation. Because that is a great, great responsibility. What was it? I've made this quote before that Uncle Ben always used to say to Peter Parker, Spider-Man, with great power comes great responsibility. And that is truth. With great power, with a lot of responsibility there, you've got to be able to do the task. And if any person needs wisdom, if anybody needs prayer, it is a leader that's trying to lead multitudes of people. When God asked Solomon what gift he especially wanted in 1 Kings chapter number 3, what did he ask for? He specifically asked for wisdom. That's what he desired. Lyndon B. Johnson, former president, said, a president's hardest task is not to do what's right, but to know what is right. And that is a very, very pivotal, important statement to make for a leader. Because in order to see things this way, it requires wisdom. Wisdom is something that is so important for a leader to possess in their own personal life. But here, as he's speaking about the foolish ruler, let's look at how that this ruler that he's describing was a proud ruler. Look at verse number 4. If the spirit of the ruler rise up against thee, leave not thy place, for yielding pacifieth great offenses. See, a proud ruler may do foolish things that cause them to lose the respect of those that are around them. Doing things that offend people, those that don't sit well with them. And often we see this with having no control of themselves. And also we see this is evident when he describes this in Proverbs chapter 16, verse number 32. He says, he that is slow to anger is better than the mighty, and he that ruleth his spirit than he that taketh a city. See, a person that's a proud ruler, a person that is maybe a conceited ruler, someone that is just in it for themselves, has no control. They're not going to be able to lead well. Proverbs 25, verse number 28. He that hath no rule over his own spirit is like a city that is broken down and without walls. He can't lead well. He has nothing within himself that can actually lead the way he is supposed to. And this is very evident of a foolish ruler. But also he speaks about a pliable ruler. Look at verses 5 through 7. There is an evil which I have seen under the sun, as an error which proceedeth from the ruler. Folly is set in great dignity, and the rich sit in low place. I have seen servants upon horses, and princes walking as servants upon the earth. What's he talking about here? Well, you got to look at the word pliable. What does this mean? It means that a person is very easily influenced, can be persuaded to do things. We've seen many leaders like this, not just in the Bible, but throughout the history of man. Leaders have been persuaded, they've been pliable. So at the same time, if a ruler is too pliable, so there's got to be a happy medium here. The ruler has to be self-confident. You can't have someone that's in office that's just wishy-washy. They've got to be able to say what exactly needs to be said without any type of reservation. Now, if a leader comes up and they're up there and we were having to do something serious like go to war, and they were come up and they just said, well, I think we should go to war. What do y'all think? No, that would not be a good way to present something, especially if it was a very serious matter. When a leader speaks, they need to look at the audience and they need to be confident in what they're saying. Now, I'm not saying be a proud person. I'm saying be a self-confident person, to be confident in what they're actually saying. But at the same time, you can't be wishy-washy. There's got to be a happy medium. So at the same time, if a ruler is too pliable, he is also a fool. If the leader lacks character and courage, then fools will be placed in high offices and qualified people in lower offices. And who would know this best? Solomon was a king. So as he wrote this, he would have known that. Illustration here. Solomon's son, Rehoboam, was proud and unyielding, and this led to the division of the kingdom. Instead of following the advice of wise counselors, those who tried their best to speak to Rehoboam and said, listen, just listen to what we have to say, he turned a deaf ear to it. And what did he do? He sought the advice of his youthful friends, those individuals that had no experience, had nothing really wise to say, and he made the elders walk and he put the young men on the horses. So, with things being said here, Solomon hit the nail right on the head with what he was describing here within this verse. So first of all, he describes the foolish ruler. the one that makes folly, that does not lead well. So you can't be proud, you can't be wishy-washy. You've got to find that happy medium there to where you know that you're self-confident. You know you're confident in what has to happen, but also you've got to have a heart for the people. If you're proud, you don't have a heart for the people. And that is evident as being a good ruler. So he first of all describes the foolish ruler. Number two, he describes the foolish workers. Let's look here, verses 8 through 11. He that diggeth a pit shall fall into it, and whoso breaketh an edge, a serpent shall bite him. Whoso removeth stone shall he hurt with therewith, and he that cleaveth wood shall be endangered thereby. If the iron be blunt, and he do not whet the edge, then must he put to more strength, but wisdom is profitable to direct. Surely the serpent will bite without enchantment, and a babbler is no better. Now, you're thinking, this really just seems out of place here a little bit. As I read and I was looking, studying on this, this is a unique section of what Solomon is trying to describe here. And here's a question you have to ask yourself. Is Solomon saying that every job has its occupational hazards? Seems like that's what he's getting at here. Every job has some type of hazard that is going to maybe present itself. And if so, what lesson was he teaching, and why did he take so much space to illustrate the obvious? Well, his theme is folly, okay? This is what he's getting at. The folly not to be someone that is unwise, but to actually be wise. And he certainly was not teaching that hard work is foolish because you might get injured. Because throughout the book, and we've mentioned this in previous studies, Solomon has emphasized the importance of honest labor and the joys that working an honest wage brings. He said there is joy in serving the Lord. There is joy in working for that which God has blessed you with. So why would he contradict all that? Well, obviously we know there are no contradictions in the Bible, and we know that Scripture is inerrant. So what is he saying here? Well, I think it's important to see that Solomon was describing people who attempted to do their work, however, they suffered because they were working foolishly. Now, there's a difference between working wisely and working foolishly. Examples here that he gives in verse number 8. Look at there again. We see that the man had dug a pit. Perhaps this was a pit that he had dug for possibly storing grain or just having something there. But he fell into the pit himself. Why? Why did he do that? Well, more than likely he fell in and got injured because he was not acting and he lacked the wisdom to do the job that was before him. Also, we see here another man broke through a hedge. Now, what is the hedge here? It's a wall. He was working, maybe trying to build a wall for a house, maybe trying to build something that's there. And what happened here? He's working, and here comes a snake right out, and it bites him. Now, was he taking the necessary precautions to do whatever's necessary to avoid getting bitten? And that's what Solomon is getting at here, is to have the wisdom when you're preparing a task or preparing to do a job that lays before you. Example here. If you're going out to chainsaw and you're going to chainsaw a tree, it's important to have the necessary things on. If you need to have some type of shield so the wood pieces don't fly in your eye, and if you don't wear a shield and you go out there chainsawing and that piece comes in your eye and you go, oh, woe is me, lesson learned. I've had that happen. Things get in my eye, not wearing glasses, not wearing safety equipment. Kendra had to lay me down. I cried like a baby trying to get something out of my eye. I'm just being transparent with you here. you have to take the necessary precautions. You have to. Because if not, if you go out doing something unwisely, you can get injured. And this is what he's speaking about, folly, not being wise in what you're about to do. Verse number 9, he goes about talking about, whoso removeth stone shall be hurt therewith, and he that cleaveth wood shall be endangered thereby. He goes to mention that quarries in the forest were worked on, or injuries, cutting stone and splitting logs. And then he goes in verse number 10, if the iron be blunt and he do not whet the edge, then must he put it to more strength. But wisdom is profitable to direct. A foolish worker trying to split wood with a dull edge. I mean, you try to cut wood with a dull edge, you're going to be there all day. But the wise individual will take the time to step away. Because some people think, I've got to get it done. I've got to get it done no matter the cost. But a wise individual will step aside and say, if this thing is sharper, I can get the job done quicker. But if I stand here and chop with just a dull edge, it's never going to accomplish anything. And like the old saying goes, don't work harder, work smarter. Work smarter. My dad taught me that about carrying stuff, and I remember trying to carry stuff down from the barn, and he reminded me, he said, you know, we got a four-wheeler. He said, you can put stuff on that four-wheeler. You don't have to carry it down by yourself. So don't work harder, work smarter. You know, that's important. So I think that's what is being implied here. And then he goes here into verse number 11. Surely the serpent will bite without enchantment, and a babbler is no better. See, snake charmers were common as entertainers in that day. Snakes have no external ears, as we know. As if you get close, you've ever seen a snake. I don't know. I don't really care for snakes. You might. I don't know. I know some people like to have them as pets. You know, pray for them. I don't like snakes. I don't like having them personally. I've never held one, so probably never will. But snakes have no external ears. They pick up sound waves primarily through the bone structure of their head. That's how they pick up the vibrations. Well, here he says the charmer failed to charm. He failed to do this, maybe because he was a novice, or maybe he didn't know what he was doing. And he tried to charm the snake and really just made a fool of himself, and the snake bites him. Now, I've seen some videos of those guys that can do those charms with those snakes that come up out of those crates. I wouldn't do it. But they got them in a trance. I don't know how they do it. It must be a generational, a family thing. But they've got them there, and they'll wave back and forth, and those snakes will just look at them. And I'm just thinking any moment that snake's going to go pop them right there. But you know, they do that. They charm them. And here it is. They would laugh at him because he didn't know what he was doing. He acted in folly, and he failed, and he wasn't wise. And then, to make matters worse, he could not profit from the entertainment. So not only did he fail and got bit, but he didn't profit anything. So acting in folly brings no good, no success there. So Solomon talks about that with foolish workers. That's what that whole 8 through 11 talks about. And then he takes this step in chapters 12 through 15, verses 12 through 15, about foolish talkers. The words of a wise man's mouth are gracious, but the lips of a fool will swallow up himself. The beginning of the words of the mouth is foolishness, and the end of his talk is mischievous madness. A fool also is full of words. A man cannot tell what shall be and what shall be after him. Who can tell him? The labor of the foolish wearieth every one of them, because he knoweth not how to go to the city. Now, in the book of Proverbs, Solomon has much to say about the speech of fools. He says a lot about that. And here he points out 4 characteristics of their words. The first thing he points out in verse number 12 is the destructive nature of words. You know, the Bible has a lot to say about what we say. And we won't go into a lot of that because we did that when we went through the book of James. But the tongue, when we say things, can be used for good, or it can be used for bad. But we know that what we say can never come back. If you say something to someone, you can apologize all you want, but you can never, ever, ever get it back. And he says here that for the foolish individual, the foolish talker, the lips of a fool will swallow up himself. Like Andy Griffith once said, he said, I'm going to eat crow with what I've said. And often we come back to say that with things that we've said and it didn't age well. We said one thing, but then something else happened. And he points out here that the fool can speak in a way that is very destructive. Number 2 is unreasonable. What does this mean by what the person is saying? The beginning of the words of his mouth is foolishness, and the end of his talk is mischievous madness. So what he's saying is the person that speaks doesn't make sense. You ever just sat and just listened to someone in a conversation, and you know the person that when you get to talking to, you're like trying to get away, because if you're not, you're going to be there for hours upon hours upon hours. Well, I've just listened to people before talk, and I literally have just got lost in what they're trying to say. I'm trying to put pieces of the puzzle together, what they're trying to say. I don't know if they're just so excited to talk or just what they're trying to do. But here he's saying that what is spoken doesn't make sense, and the longer that they speak, it gets crazier with what they're trying to say. It just doesn't make sense. And Paul is saying here, he calls them unruly and vain talkingness in Titus chapter 1, verse number 10. There was a Jewish writer by the name of Shalom Akim who says, you can't tell when a fool speaks, he grinds much and produces little. And so that's what he's saying here, is that someone just basically speaks unreasonable things, just here, there, and everywhere. Nothing is coherent. Nothing is really applicable to anything that they're trying to discuss. And that's what he's saying here about a foolish talker. But then number 3 is an uncontrolled talker. Look at verse number 14 again. It says, a fool also is full of words. A man cannot tell what shall be and what shall be after him. Who can tell him? Full of words, realizing that nothing is said. Wow. You know, oftentimes I feel like that when I talk to Titus. I stand and say things to him, but I feel like afterwards nothing's really been said. I'm just kidding. But I mean, we just know sometimes that can happen. Just an uncontrolled individual, full of words, a lot to say, but there's nothing that's really been said. And then here we see he also speaks about being boastful in verses 14 through 15. A fool also is full of words. A man cannot tell what shall be said and what shall be after him. Who can tell him? The labor of the foolish weareth every one of them, because he knoweth not how to go to the city. And there's some humor here in this. Because the labor of the foolish is so bad, the foolishness is that he tries to say what he thinks he knows and thinks that he knows everything about it, but he really doesn't know anything about it to begin with. It's sort of like trying to tell somebody where to go and you don't even know how to get there yourself. I've seen stories of this and seen some funny movies also where people try to tell someone where to go, and they try to get them to go somewhere, and they're half a mile down the road and they're thinking, well, I don't even know where I'm going, and I don't even think they knew where they were going. And so this is what it is he's speaking about the person that has this about them, this foolish talker, about how they speak boastful, thinking they know what they're talking about, but they really don't. They don't. And then lastly here, number 4, he goes and describes the foolish officers. Verse 16 through 20. Woe to them, O land, when thy king is a child and thy princes eat in the morning. Blessed art thou, O land, when thy king is the son of nobles and thy princes eat in the due season.
for strength and not for drunkenness. By much slothfulness the building decayeth, and through idleness of the hands the house droppeth through. A feast is made for laughter, and wine maketh merry, but money answereth all things. Curse not the king, no, not in thy thought, and curse not the rich in thy bedchamber, for a bird of the air shall carry the voice, and that which hath wings shall tell the matter. So he goes here and changes gears to the last part of speaking about a foolish group. And this is foolish officers. See, Solomon has already described foolish rulers. Now he exposes the folly of the officers who work underneath the rulers. The bureaucrat who were part of the machinery of the kingdom, he gives 4 characteristics of these foolish individuals. Number 1 is the indulgence. See, if the king is there and he emulates this, the people there around him will reflect that. They'll reflect what the king does. They'll mimic what he is doing. Oswald Chambers once said this: spiritual maturity is not reached by the passing of the years, but by obedience to the will of God. You know, there's been many people that I have seen and heard stories of in churches that are well seasoned, have lived a lot of life, but can still speak and act with a lot of immaturity. True maturity and true wisdom comes through what he's talking about, and that's obedience to God. But the people that serve under the king will imitate that. If they see him doing something, they'll mimic that. Also here, incompetence. Verse number 18, look at that verse here again. By much slothfulness the building decayeth, and through idleness of the hands the house drippeth through. Incompetence and being incapable, being unable to do the task that is there before them. I think this president said this. I didn't write down the name. I forgot the quote. Oh, it's by Woodrow. Forgot to write this down. Couldn't remember who said that. Woodrow Wilson said this. A friend of mine says that every man who takes office in Washington either grows or swells. When I give a man an office, I watch him carefully to see whether he is swelling or growing. So you give someone, you let the leash and you let them out a little bit to see how they will handle it. And that's what he's speaking about here with a foolish officer, to see if there is any incompetence there, if they're unwilling to do the task that's there before them. Then number 3 is indifference. Verse number 19 again. A feast is made for laughter, and wine maketh merry, but money answereth all things. Now, this verse declares the personal philosophy of the foolish officers. Eat all you can, enjoy all you can, and get all you can. And they are totally indifferent to the responsibilities of their office or the needs of the people. They really don't care. And that's a foolish leader. That's not one that's actually seeking wisdom, is acting in that way, not caring, being indifferent to the needs of individuals. You can tell when someone actually cares, when they're working toward something. I mean, you just look about it. You just stand back. You don't even have to hear what they have to say. You can just stand back and observe what they do. And that's how you can tell if people actually care about what their responsibilities are and how they're going to serve and work for the people. But then he goes in here in this last verse about indiscretion, verse number 20. Curse not the king, no, not in thy thought, and curse not the rich in thy bedchamber, for a bird of the air shall carry the voice, and that which hath wings shall tell the matter. Now, you ever heard that little familiar saying, a little bird told me? Many people think it originated from this verse that Solomon wrote here. But curse not the king. No, not in thy thought, and curse not the rich in thy bedchamber. For a bird can carry the voice, and that which hath wings shall tell the matter. This tells me 2 things. First of all, anyone that's in authority that's above us, and this may hit home to a lot of us because I know right now we don't really care, or I don't really care of some things that's happened while our current president has been in office, but I've also seen people that bash and say awful things and will post negative, just very awful quotes and just things that should not be said about a leader. Even if we can't respect the person that's in office, we have to respect the office. And so if the person's in the office, we respect that office of leadership. So that's one thing he's talking about here. Don't curse the king, no, not in thy thought, and curse not the rich in thy bedchamber, for the bird shall carry the voice. And what he's speaking about here is regardless of where you say something, like I go back to what I said before, once you say something, you can never get it back. That will find its way out some way, somehow. What you say, even when you speak to someone and they come to you and they say, hey, this is just between us. You ever heard somebody say that? This is between us. And that always tells me when they say that, can I talk to you about something? It's just between us. I'm really guarded by that, and I try to be very careful with how I conduct myself and how I discuss that, because whatever you say always, always, always can get into something else's ear and go back to maybe the source that you're talking about. So you have to be very guarded. And that's what he's saying here about being wise. Be wise with what you're doing. Be wise with what you're saying, because that which hath wings shall tell the matter. And there have been a lot of relationships, there have been a lot of big issues that have really just gotten huge because of things like that happening. So he's talking about here, this last part, about foolish officers and how that they conduct themselves. And this whole chapter here is just related about the destructiveness of folly and how that can really be destructive and hurt. So, interesting. Yeah. 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 Oh, yeah. Excellent reason. Because regardless of where you say anything, there's always that you're taking a risk. Because it could get back, it could get out to someone, and then once it's said, you can't just gobble it back up again. I mean, once it's out there, it's there. Anybody else have a thought? Mm. Yeah. 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 Yeah.
That's a good challenge here tonight from Solomon. Work with wisdom and seek wisdom, and because it's easy to fall into folly if we're not careful, and that's where we have to really just guard ourselves and be careful with what we're influenced by and who we're influenced by. That's important too. All right, we'll stand together. We'll pray tonight. Father, we thank you for this opportunity this evening to be here. Thank you for this study. Been such a joy, a blessing to go through this book, and as we're coming down to the close of it, I'm thankful for what it has taught me as I've re-examined it again in great detail. And I just thank you for the ones that are here this evening. Thank you for their interaction, their questions, their comments, and we're just thankful that we can open your Word, and what a blessing it is just to be able to study your Word and to learn more about you. And we pray for safety tonight as we travel home. Thank you so much for the gift of salvation through Jesus Christ. And we ask all this in His name. Amen.